nirasya sarva sandeham akikritya sudarshanam prakashita rahasyam tam bhajami gurumishwaram. Shri Govinda Pararavinda Marupananya Vilashojitan Purna Prema Rasotsavo Jalamano Vritti Prasannananan Shajvad Krishna Katha Mahamrita Payo Rasho Murake Dato Vande Bhagavatani Mananudavam Murdna Nipatyakshito Namo Mahavaranyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gaura Tvishe Nama Jayatam Surato Pangor Mama Mandamate Gati Matsarvasva Parambojo Radha Madana Mohano Kulari Devatamor Madana Mohan Jar Sevak Raghunatha Rup Sanatan Jaya Rupa Sanatana Bhatta Raghunath Shri Jiva Bhatta Dasa Raghunath Echai Goshai Kori Charana Vandan Jaha Hoite Vignanasha Bhishta Puran Adadana Dantoy Yacheham Puna Puna Srimad Rupa Parambojo Dhulisam Janma Janmani. Raganugami Bhajano Lasamanasanam Shri Radhaya Sahasara Smaratam Brajendhum Shri Rupa Parakamala Shrita Cheta Samme Chittam Satam Madhukari Yatupada Padme Yaram Yanikidaga Sangashamani Shotratritim Sangata Yasvadhya Rasikai Sukabdi Janani Dikarya Mukti Spriham Yadhyata Hridaye Vrajendra Tanuja Premamrita Syandini Saji Yad Hari Bhakta Vrinda Mohita Dhanyeha Padyavali. So by the grace of Shri Kali Yuga Pavana, the Svabhajana Vibhajana, Prayojana Avatar, Prema Purushottam, Karuna Maha Sagar, Shri Gauranga Mahaprabhu, and his beloved Parshad, the crest jewel of Gauriya Vaishnava Charjas, the fulfiller of his heart's desire in this world, Sri Rupa Gosvami Pad. Again, today we'll engage in discussion of Padyavali. So we continue discussing Tṛṇād sunīcena, this verse and this quality in particular. And we resume from our last reading where we looked at statements of Sri Rupa Gosvami in his Utkalika Valari as illuminated by the commentary of Sri Balavidibhushan Pad, whereby we see how bhaktas such as Rupa Goswami express such disconcertion or such heartache in their feeling of being unfit to receive the object of their aspiration, and yet they continue to pray for or continue to desire that object, even though they feel audacious for doing so, because they're goaded on by the attractiveness, by the sweetness, by the charm of that object itself. So we discussed this, set of psychological dominoes, so to speak, how from association with sadhus comes hearing about Krishna, about Radharani, about the gopis, about the prema of Braja, all of these topics. From that hearing comes learning, comes understanding of the greatness of that prema that is found in them, of the bhava that is found in them. From that knowledge, from that understanding of its greatness comes desire for that, desire to attain that, desire to relish that. From that desire comes pursuit of attaining it. From pursuit of attaining it comes examination for causes of non-attainment. From such examination comes recognition of one's own shortcomings, faults, disqualifications, and so forth. From those perceptions of such disqualification come feelings of audacity or feelings of hesitation in seeking that object or in praying for that object because of one's perceived lowness or incapability or undeservingness of it. So it is from that association and that grace that such self-knowledge and feelings of unfitness and audacity can come about. And yet, from that association, from that knowledge, from that desire also comes, nevertheless, persistent or perseverant pursuit of that, even in the midst of one's disqualifications, or with the resolve to purge oneself of such unfavorabilities. So, how then one can at times feel this sense of being audacious and heartbroken in being unfit for the thing, and then also continue to pursue it. This is what was discussed somewhat in the last class, and what we'll look at in further detail today, as well as how sadhakas in such a condition are advised to go on engaging in sadhana. So I'll resume from where we were in the previous file. I shared a new file. We'll go a little further past where that other one left off. So I begin with just a reference to a well-known statement in the Charitamrita, which also reflects the same dynamic which was discussed in the passages of the Utkalika Valari that we finished with last time. So, Sri Rupa Pad and Sri Sanatana Pad also describe this experience of an inner push and pull between feelings of unworthiness and longing during their first meeting with Sriman Mahaprabhu. Quote, "Seeing our unworthiness, we feel agitation in our hearts. Still, because of your qualities, intense desire arises." So we cited earlier this passage from the Padma Puran, which Rupa and Sanatan recited before Mahaprabhu, which Rupa Goswami classified as a prayer that is Dainya Bodhika, or expressive of Dainya, where he said that there is no greater sinner, no greater offender than me. I am ashamed of myself. What can I say to you? So he expresses such feelings of unworthiness and repentance. And so in that same section of the text, then this statement comes, seeing our unworthiness, or in other words, when we think of the disqualifications that we perceive within ourselves, then agitation arises in our hearts. So again, here Sanatana Goswami defined Dainya as disconcertion or vyayagram, or loosely in more common speech in Bengali what is called bakulata. And Sanatana Goswami elsewhere in his explanation of karpanya, or the limb of Sharanagati known as humility, he explained it to mean arti, or a state of distress or heartache. So here in this statement in the Charitamrita we get another word, kub, or kob, agitation, or this unrest. So from all these different angles we can see how this same state is being referred to. So when we perceive that unworthiness for the thing that we so greatly long for, then we feel unrest, or then we feel agitated within our heart. But despite that, because of your qualities, or in other words, because you, our desirable object, are so wonderful, we still this desire to achieve it continues to flow. Not that, oh, it's difficult to attain, I'll just give up. Oh, that's too expensive, I won't try to buy it. Oh, that's too hard to get, I won't, do the necessary work or do the necessary training to achieve it. No. Although we feel very unfit and that it's very difficult for us to achieve, nevertheless, we can't stop desiring it. We can't think of pursuing anything else. The qualities of the object, the desirability or the pleasurability, as Baladeva Vibhushan Pad put it, is so intense that even though we can't give it up, and yet we're unfit to get it. So what do you do when there's nothing else to do? You only want this. You can't be taken. You can't be distracted. You can't be directed towards anything else. And yet you're unsuccessful in achieving it, and you see also obstacles or unfitness within yourself to get it. Then that pressure or that jam, so to speak, that is dainya. That is the humility that's being spoken of here. So, Sri Rupa Pad expresses a further degree of reflection on this inner tension later in Udkalika-Valari by attributing the whole of the experience of having both feelings of reluctance and audacity, as well as feelings of intense desire and unabashedness, ultimately to the grace of Radha and Krishna. So on the one hand, he feels intensely desirous and unabashed. He won't stop desiring it no matter what. But on the other hand, sometimes he feels audacious and reluctant to pray for it. And he's wavering, or his attention is sometimes going to this side, sometimes going to that side. So in the passage we discussed last time, he attributed this to the pleasurableness in the pleasurable object, or the sweetness in Radha and Krishna that inspires both this desire for it as well as this sense of being unworthy of it, as per the domino effect we've discussed. So here, he also, as he described Radha and Krishna's sweetness as the fundamental cause of both sides of the pendulum, so to speak, here also he speaks of Radha and Krishna's grace as such. So he says, how could this low creature be fit to desire, even this which is evidently fit only for the exalted? O you two guardians of the heart-stricken, the splendor of your grace, free from consideration of great and small, alternately, is tremendously overpowering. So on the one hand, he's saying, how could a creature like me ever desire this thing that's only for such exalted people? I couldn't. It wouldn't be fitting. But your grace is overpowering me. Your grace which comes even to people who are unfit for it and makes them want it, even though they're not fit for it. That is overpowering me to nevertheless continue to pursue it or to want it. Sri Vibhushan Pad comments that, quote, this, ayam, refers to the fortune of such service. That is the fortune of intimately serving Radha and Krishna as a manjari in the kunjas of Braja. So the quote, this is to be inferred from the context in the previous verses of the text. So that's what's referred to. He further comments that, quote, the exalted refers to the highest class of bhaktas, and that, quote, great and small, guru lagu, refers to those who are high and low, that is, who are qualified and unqualified for such intimate service to Radha and Krishna. So in other words, Radha and Krishna's grace comes to those, or grace which inspires desire for this type of seva, the seva of Radharani's manjaris, it comes to those who are qualified for it. It also comes to those who are unqualified for it. The implication being that when it comes to those who are in a state of disqualification, it first of all purges them of those disqualifications. He summarizes Sri Rupa Pada's intent in this verse as follows. Although he is low, that is, feels himself unfit, still he is impelled to act in this way, that is, to desire such intimate service to Radha and Krishna, even though he feels unqualified for it, by your grace. That is, it is your grace that inspires, It is your grace that inspires this desire in his heart, and inspires him to disregard even his unworthiness of that service, and so desire it. Near the conclusion of Udkalika-Valari, the author further speaks in praise of this grace of Radha and Krishna. quote, I praise in assemblies that grace of you too, which goes to the wretched, and by which dwelling here in the forests of Braja, where any sort of graminaceous birth is desired, even by the exalted, in whom taintless prem has manifested, after attaining the state of being your own, has been done even by I of condemnable birth. So he's saying that this grace of Radha and Krishna, it doesn't only come to those who are already highly exalted and fully purified and so forth. It may come even to people who are in an unqualified state, because by reference to Jiva Goswami's siddhānta, it's actually transmitted by sadhus, and sadhus' grace may be evoked upon persons suffering by virtue of their remembrance of having undergone such suffering, and thus it may come even to persons who, at their present stage, are not in a state to directly receive it. So he says that this grace which comes even, which goes to the wretched, and what does that grace do? It inspires within the heart of someone the desire to be born even as a blade of grass in Braja. And it does this, even by the exalted in whom taintless prem has manifested. And it does that even in those who already have prem, those who are already Bhagavan's own. So what he's referring to is the statement of Uddhava, which was also referred to by Raghunath Das Goswami in the passage we cited earlier. So we started with this statement of Raghunath Das Goswami about how he praised or bows down to the grass of Braja, and how this longing for the bhav of Braja inspires this, quote, being humbler than a blade of grass, in the form of praying to be born even as a blade or of grass there, or amongst those blades of grass, and holding such grass within the teeth as one makes such a prayer. So Das Goswami referred to the prayers of Brahma and Uddhava. So we already discussed the prayer of Brahma. Still left to be discussed is the prayer of Uddhava, and in the course of coming to that, we now quote this statement of Rupa Goswami in the Utkalika Valari, where he's alluding to that very same prayer of Uddhava. So now we'll look at that statement. Sri Rupapad's reference here to desire for birth as a blade of grass in Braja, quote, even by the exalted, in whom taintless prem has manifested, after attaining the state of being your own, refers primarily to the same prayer of Uddhava that was alluded to in the aforecited verse of Sri Das Goswami Pad from his Brajavilas Stava. So Uddhava says the following, Aho, may I become any of the shrubs, creepers, or herbs in Vrindavan, carrying the foot dust of they who, forsaking the difficult to give up path of the noble and their relatives, followed the way of Mukunda, only able to be sought after by the Shrutis. Sri Jivapad comments that the particle aho in this verse is spoken by Uddhava out of the heartache produced by desire, meaning that the heartache, that is humility, Uddhava expresses in this verse, is an outcome of his intense desire for the prem bhakti of the gopis of Braja. So what's very interesting, as we discussed last time, the particle bata, here we have the particle aho. So Jiva Goswami is characterizing what is the emotion that this emotive particle is expressing. So he says it's expressing arti, or a state of distress or heartache. And what was humility defined as by Sanatana Goswami? Arti, as the very same thing. So the very emotion that is said to be what dainya is made up of, that very emotion is what Jiva Goswami is saying this particle is expressing. And on point with our theme of discussion, where did that heartache come from? Quote, produced by desire, right? He says, Abhilash krita hridayarto, that there's this ache in the heart that's made by desire for a particular object which is yet to be fulfilled. So this little comment of Jiva Goswami in a nutshell, illustrates the entire line of thought and how, dainya is so integral to the path of Raganuga Bhakti. So, we'll look at a few other comments he makes. He further explains that Uddhava's sequential mention of, quote, any of the shrubs, creepers, or herbs in Vrindavan is stated out of humility and a successively increasing desire for complete attainment of the foot dust of the gopis. Since creepers grow lower to the ground than shrubs, herbs grow even lower than creepers, and the lower to the ground the form into which he is born is, the more likely he is to attain the foot dust of the gopis on his body. In other words, he's explaining why does it say Gulma Lata Ushadinam? Why doesn't he just say Gulma? Why doesn't he just mention one plant? Why does he have to mention three? So he's saying that he mentions three because he's thinking, oh, let me be born as a shrub. That way I could get the gopis' foot dust. And then he thinks, oh, but maybe the foot dust won't fall on all the shrubs. I need to be a creeper, which, winds up into those shrubs and trees and is even lower. And then wait, but that won't even do. I need to be an herb or just, a grass, a gramineous species, which, is soft and more likely to be stepped on. So he mentions these three, thinking more and more acutely how exactly he'll get this foot dust upon himself. This is the way Jiva Gosvami reads it, or explains the purpose of the mention of three different categories of plants. In essence, he prays to become a blade of grass as a result of considering himself to be extremely lowly, out of paramount humility. So, very interestingly, right, here in our topic, sunīcena, in our Tṛṇād sunīcena is the whole topic we're trying to explain. So, Jiva Gosvami here, he says, paramadinataya, because of this intense humility, or this dainya, what does he feel? Atmano otinichatva. So, su is a prefix which conveys a superlative sense. Oti is a prefix which conveys also an intensifier. So he's saying that he is praying for this state of trinatva, of being a blade of grass, because of considering himself otinicha, or very low, and he's considering himself very low because of paramadinata, or intense humility. So this, this will give us, direct reference from a precise statement of Jiva Gosvami for this idea that this being lower than grass is descriptive of the quality of humility, and this quality of humility is what emerges from desire for this prema found in Braja. Not that humility can't be inspired by other aspiration for other forms of bhakti or other things, but that in its free rein sense, or its ultimate sense, this is what inspires this to the greatest degree. So, this prayer of Uddhava, which is praised by Bhagavan Sri Krishna himself, this prayer of Uddhava, who, meaning Uddhava, is praised by Bhagavan Sri Krishna himself as superior even to Brahma, Shiva, Lakshmi, and Balaram, and as the very epitome of a bhakta, is thus an ideal illustration of how a bhakta's longing and humility inspire within the heart an intense feeling of oneself being, quote, far lower than even a blade of grass. Sri Sanatana Pad also explains elsewhere in Brihad Bhagavatamrita that when Uddhava restated this aforecited prayer he made to the Braja Gopis during his conversation with Sri Narada and Gopakumar in Dwaraka about the greatness of Braja Prem, he held a blade of grass between his teeth as an expression of his feeling of disconcertion arising from heartache, or arti, that is, from humility. Thus, in this way also, by means of a formal gesture of holding grass between one's teeth, a bhakta exhibits this quality of feeling oneself to be, quote, far lower than even a blade of grass, as a result of the humility produced by intense, unfulfilled longing. So, as we discussed in the previous class, one of the thrusts of this whole discussion is to show that, if someone thinks, I should be humble, or humility is an important virtue, then how does that come about? Is it a social behavior? Is it a way of, rubbing dust on your head or acting cute in a social exchange? Not really, unless the sense of lowliness or the sense or the motivation for the offering of the reverence is inspired by this type of knowledge, this type of longing. It's not what Mahaprabhu is referring to. It's not the intended sense of, this humility as a blade of grass as Mahaprabhu spoke this verse to Raghunath Das Goswami. Right? We hear in the Charitamrita 3 citations of this Tṛṇād sunīcena verse. And one of them was personal advice that Mahaprabhu gave to Raghunath Das Goswami. So when Mahaprabhu gave such advice to Das Goswami being someone who was part of his intimate circle, who was there to imbibe the very essence of what Mahaprabhu came to relish and came to convey, then, we can say that in that instruction to Das Goswami must be contained the mukta pragraha nyaya, or the free rein ultimate sense to which this idea can be expressed, which, as we're seeing in Das Goswami's own writing and Rupa Goswami's own writing, is of this nature in reference to these statements of Brahma and Uddhava in the Bhagavad. So, to quote-unquote be humble, or to try to become humble, it's not something small, or it's not something, secondary, or something that can be done apart from the principle or the primary process that's prescribed. But rather, if one actually genuinely follows the main prescription of following the sadhana taught in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, this will be the outcome. It's not even that there needs to be an entire separate notion of it, but that if one engages in the Shravan Kirtan in the appropriate sadhu sangha, then such knowledge, such desire, such self-examination, such, self-analysis, leading to recognition of perception of disqualification, leading to this disconcertion, which then leads to this, abject state of prayer, such that one might be inspired to hold grass between one's teeth, or pray in such a manner as was shown by these Mahajans and so on. All of this will unfold, in due course, or in due process, so to speak. So, the substance of the humility is based on the knowledge, the purity, and the intensity of desire within the heart. It's not merely some social behavior or some way of acting cute in, groups of Vaishnavas or things like that. No doubt, to be respectful, to follow etiquette, to have rich, warm dealings, very good, very nice. That's a great joy and a great, positive feature of life, so to speak. But if, mere behavior is taken to be the substance of these instructions, then it ends up being quite superficial. Just as, we were talking the other day in the Chaitanya Charitamrita class about those 2 verses in the Bhagavatam that speak about bathing in the foot dust of Mahatmas, and that unless and until this happens, none of the karma one performs will lead to the attainment of bhakti. None of the karma one performs will purify the mind of anarthas, all these points. So, there in the verse of Jad Bharat that follows, the one that was cited, where he says that in that association of the Mahatmas, there is constant discussion of Bhagavan, wherein, or because of which, there is the cessation of gramya kata, or village talk, worldly interests, and so on. So, the point, or what's being indicated, is that by, quote, bathing in the foot dust of Mahatmas, or becoming a blade of grass that's touched by the foot dust of the gopis, it's not simply literally that some dust falls on you, but that one becomes completely one-pointedly focused on and cherishes the beauty and the greatness of that, the bhava of those Mahatmas, or the bhava of those gopis. So if someone comes and bows down to a sadhu and puts the dust of their feet on their head, and then, doesn't listen to the Harikatha they speak, and goes home and continues with the same Gramya Katha that they were busy with before they came, then did they really, quote-unquote, bathe in the foot dust of the Mahatma? If the Bhagavatam is saying bathing in the foot dust of the Mahatma is defined as that wherein one hears Harikatha and no longer engages in, worldly, conversation motivated by worldly concerns, then, it becomes a superficiality. So, in this way, we just want to stress that, these teachings that the Goswamis have given, this path of bhakti that they've, outlined, if you will, it's so precise and it's so, well designed, and it shows this whole, process by which someone's attitudes can be, directed and led towards this highest object of spiritual attainment in such a relishable and beautiful way that, what deficiency is there in them? We're not finding any deficiency. And how it is that people can remain, preoccupied and satisfied with other things is a bit of a mystery, and how they would neglect to avail themselves of such incredibly wonderful, vivid, and, endearing explanation of all these things. So by our discussion here, we hope that a little bit of that clarity and that precision with which they wrote, and the subtlety and the richness of the objects that they've described, can be made accessible and taken to heart. Anyhow, not to diverge too much. So, further emphasis on the importance of fostering the spirit of being, quote, far lower than even a blade of grass, in the specific sense of longing for the prem bhakti of the residents of Braja, which is the primary point that we're driving at throughout this whole commentary, is vividly evident in Sri Sanatana Pad's conclusion on the aforementioned discussion regarding humility and Braja Prema between Sri Narada, Uddhava, and Gopakumar in Brihad Bhagavatamrita. When Sri Narada and Uddhava find that Gopakumar feels unsatiated, even after attaining Bhagavan Sri Krishna in Dwaraka, they understand that his longing is solely for the prema bhakti of Braja, and thus call him into seclusion to advise him about this. There they discuss whether it would be better for Gopakumar to go to Purushottam Kshetra, or commonly spoken Jagannath Puri, or Braja on earth, to continue his sadhana, so that he can finally attain his ultimate cherished object. At Sri Narada's request, Uddhava gives the following advice. That reality, which is fully manifest there in Sri Purushottam Kshetra, is also manifest here in Dwaraka. So Uddhava is speaking from Dwaraka at this time. And just I'll add that the statements that we read earlier, where humility was defined by Sanatana Goswami, that was part of this very same conversation, some 10 or 15 verses earlier in the text. So right after those points are made about what is humility and the importance of practicing it, then a little later in this conversation, then the practical application of that, what should Gopakumar now do specifically, then that topic comes. So Uddhava is giving this advice. Certainly there is no difference between the manifestations here and there. But there, that is in Purushottam Kshetra, that sorrow, that is the sorrow that arises from feeling the absence of the attainment of one's Ishtadevata. So here we can say that this, quote, shok or sorrow is also a direct reference to dainya, to arti, to vyakulata, to vyagra, to kob, to, all these different words that are being used in different places to describe that state of unrest in the heart that's produced by the unfulfilled desire. So he's speaking again to that and saying that that sorrow will occur as a result of seeing and hearing his lila that takes place in the land of Braja. So this requires a little bit of attention. He's saying, if you go to Puri, then you will see and hear Leela from Braja. So you might say, what is he saying? So in the commentary, it's explained that in Puri, there is the custom of dramatic enactment of Braja Leela. In other words, Devadasis performing, what they call Odissi dance or similar types of performance of Krishna's Leelas with the gopis and others. And there's, Harikatha, discussion of Braja Leela. So he's saying that when you go to Puri, you'll see this, culturing of Braja Leela in a way that doesn't happen in the same manner in Dwaraka. And he's saying, but you're going to feel sorrow because of that. In other words, it's not that, there's going to be a beautiful, dramas of Krishna Leela and Krishna Katha, we're all going to be happy. He's saying, when you see those things, then this sorrow that you feel is going to come about. And thus, because of this unrest in your heart, you will not feel any special joy there. These are points that are all made in the commentary. I've just summarized them briefly for the sake of concision. So he's saying that when you go there and you see all these things that remind you of Braja, it's gonna acutely remind you of your non-attainment of that. And that's not going to be a course of excitement or happiness. That's going to be a cause of sadness for you. There, in Purushottam Kshetra, as a result of the sight of Jagannath's lotus face, in other words, having darshan of Jagannath, obtaining varieties of Mahaprasad, observing his numerous outings and festivals, some degree of elation certainly arises in the heart continuously, but humility certainly does not. So this is a very interesting point. He's saying, taking Mahaprasad, joining in the yatras, joining in the big festivals, that produces elation. That produces some excitement. That produces some, high feelings, if you will. But it's not something that directly nourishes or directly leads to feelings of humility. So, if we look at this in a more broader sense, or in the, today's society, there's a lot of emphasis on going to, events, festivals, celebrations, things like this, which produce some, high times or some excitement and the fun of seeing people again after a long time, and eating well and being in an atmosphere of opulence and celebration. And that's all thought to be, very, very important, or that's considered to be some great part of Vaishnava culture or Vaishnava sadhana. But here, we can see a different point of stress is being made, where just becoming elated by having festivals and taking prasad, that's perceived as rather something unfavorable. And that instead, things that give rise to humility, things that give rise not to excitement and happiness, but actually sorrow and longing and a state of unrest in the heart, that's actually more important. So, as we'll see, Uddhava doesn't advise Gopakumar to go to Puri, because he doesn't see that at the stage that he's in is most favorable for him. So here, the importance of humility, dainya, as an essential and paramount precursor of Braja Prem Bhakti, is vividly elucidated, even in contrast to many other sadhanas that are generally considered to be favorable to the attainment of Prema Bhakti, such as honoring prasadam and observing festivals. Uddhava thus describes the importance of humility in the following verse. Quote, without that, meaning dainya, humility, prema, that which is a cause of attaining Goloka, certainly does not manifest, and without attaining that plane, Goloka, one's peace of mind shall not come about. In other words, Gopakumar truly desires, truly aspires for Krishna in the land of Braja. So he'll never be at peace in his mind until he gets that object. And he won't get that object until he gets prema. And he won't get that prema until he has dainya. So what's essential for him is what will nourish or what will lead to the intensification of dainya within him. And he's saying that at this stage, having darshan of Jagannath, attending the various yatras and taking the Mahaprasad, that's not what's going to most nourish Gopakumar's dainya at this time. So that's not ideal for him in the stage that he's in. So, understanding the deep longing in the heart of Gopakumar, which can be taken as representative of the longing of a Raganuga Bhakti sadhaka, Uddhava explains that until that longing is fulfilled by the attainment of the bhakta's cherished object, not even generally favorable practices, places, reminders, and so on will ever suffice so as to bring about feelings of genuine satisfaction in the heart of such a bhakta. Thus, it is by engaging in association and activities, thus it is not by engaging in association and activities that moderately mitigate the feeling of want and lack produced by the intense desire for prem bhakti that are ultimately favorable for a sadhaka, but rather it is resorting to a place, association, and activities that make that feeling of want and lack all the more acute and give rise to an intensification of humility, of feelings of distress and disconcertion that is ultimately necessary for a sadhaka to reach their goal, as heart-wrenching as the process may be. So, this point is to be taken. In other words, how and what types of sadhan bhakti are suitable and applicable to someone, when and where, all of this has to be, diagnosed or applied according to the specific stage of a person. So this isn't to say that no Vaishnavas have no business, engaging in, utsavas or anything like this, but that according to the stage, according to the circumstances of an individual, whether or not that's necessarily all that beneficial for them or not is not guaranteed. Or in other words, there isn't some universal formula where by perpetually or, periodically rather, attending some big events that this is some greatly important or essential feature of Vaishnava sadhana. In fact, it may be something that becomes immaterial and even unfavorable at a particular stage. But especially, to put it plainly, in earlier stages, where those are opportunities to get association that one has never had, to hear and to learn things that one has never learned, to get exposure and some impressions of Vaishnava culture. Of course, these things are valuable, of course they have utility. But if someone carries on in that manner perpetually, then we can say that they may not catch the track, or they may not catch the spirit of how this path can deepen, and what is ultimately necessary for a sadhaka, the state of want, the state of hankering that is actually essential to the experience of the attainment. And we can say that in the view of many, the life of Sriman Mahaprabhu is also considered to be instructive in this respect, in that in his earlier leelas, he's associating with many, he's conducting grand Nagar Sankirtan, he's traveling about numerous places, he's receiving many guests, all of these things. But gradually as time goes on and into his final stage, then no more Nagar Sankirtan, no more big utsavas, no more, numerous guests. All these things are, brought to an end. And he goes into seclusion, he lives with a small circle, and he becomes, very much steeped in these, the side of lack, or the side of feeling oneself to be in want. And he's relishing and he's absorbing himself in Radharani's feeling of separation and so forth. So no doubt this is not directly reflective of the trajectory of a sadhaka. This is Bhagavan himself fulfilling his own desires to relish the bhava of Radharani. But we see also in the Goswamis and in the examples that they set, that they came to Braja and they, lived in a very humble and a very, abject manner, if you will, such that this feeling of dainyata became so central to the way that they conducted their sadhana and the example that they set of how sadhakas and persons following and wanting to follow the teachings of Mahaprabhu could pursue these things. So we'll get to in the next reading what Uddhava, instead of going to Puri, advises Gopakumar to do, and how it is that Gopakumar ultimately achieves his goal, and how the example and the practical teachings of the Goswamis are also right, you could say, in line with what is ultimately taught here in the Bhagavatamrita. And all of this ultimately is showing how Vaishnava sadhana can be adjusted or focused such that it genuinely fosters the spirit of dainyata, which, as Sanatana Gosvami is repeatedly stressing, is the flip side of the coin of prema, so to speak. It's that which prema is grounded in or rooted in, or without which does not come about, or so on and so forth. So I'll pause here for today, and if anyone has any comments or questions, they're welcome to hear them, and we'll hear more specifically about how sadhana bhakti can be performed in a way that's most conducive to the maturation of humility within the heart in our next discussion. Yes?
So it seems like that Mahaprabhu, from what I hear now, and just what I reflect on Mahaprabhu's biography, that really he dived deep into Raghunaga Bhakti after coming back from, after obtaining Diksha, and when he was frustrated with the students that were challenging him when he was chanting names of gopis, and so and later on, of course. So can we say that Mahaprabhu dived deep into Raghunaga Bhakti after Diksha, or before that it was something else, or can we accept his whole life as Raghunaga style?
I find it a little bit hard to say. In the case of Bhagavan himself, will we call him a sadhaka? Will we say that he's doing Raganuga sadhana, or will we say that he's relishing Ragatmika bhakti? When we hear about his diksha, right afterwards, he immediately within, one day is, saying these phrases, Krishna re bapre mora jivan shri hari kondike gele mora pran kori churi, that, oh Krishna, where have you gone, having stolen my heart? I didn't see which way you ran so that I can run after you. And he's weeping profusely, tears, and immediately exhibiting the symptoms of vipralamba and acute separation that is that of a siddha bhakta. So to describe his lila or to describe his activities as raganuga sadhana, I might be a little hesitant in that regard. However, that his life and the way that he went about relishing ragatmika bhakti was something that's also, or we can say, from which instructions for those trying to follow the path of Raganuga sadhana can be gathered. I think there certainly is grounds for that, and many commentators have certainly given, explanations to that effect. And from the, as I mentioned, from the very moment he is exhibiting symptoms of prem and that of a siddha bhakta, and he goes back, right, in the Charitamrita, ki mantra dilo gosai ki batar bal japite morman hoilo pagal. Oh Goshai, what mantra did you give me? What kind of power does it have? The more I chant it, the more my mind is becoming crazy, right? And then Ishvara Puri says, this craziness that you have, I also want some of that. And evam vrita swapriya nama kirtya jatanurago drita. Then he cites these verses from the 11th canto that describe prem bhaktas or uttam bhaktas and recognizes these lakshanas in Mahaprabhu as being that of a prem bhakta. So, by these accounts, I think that he more or less went from diksha to siddha within a day, so to speak, as per the characteristics that are described. So like that.
Yes, of course. It's Bhagavan, but yet he appears as Bhakta. So we always indicate Mahaprabhu as, that he's actually displaying he's posing as Bhakta, sadhaka, in a way. Of course, we know it's not, but, it's really hard to pinpoint, like, who is he really? So this is my kind of dilemma, how do you define Mahaprabhu? Who is Mahaprabhu? If he's not sadhaka, then he's Bhagavan. If he's Bhagavan, why is he behaving like sadhaka? In a way.
Well, what I'm saying is, I think he fits the characteristic of a siddha bhakta.
I see. Thank you.
Yes, another hand, do I see?
Pranam Baba. Pranam. Thank you very much for this beautiful katha. I was wondering, we know that Sri Rupa Gosvami was born in the family which held a high position in Bengali society. And yet in one of these prayers that we have just heard in Utkali Cavalry, he calls himself as being of condemnable birth. What does he mean here? Or does he mean being born as a human being on earth in general, as being condemnable? Or could you please explain, like, why does he say like this?
We see numerous cases of Rupa Goswami, Sanatana Gosvami speaking themselves as being low-born. So, one way that this is interpreted is that their family was, as per the genealogy listed by Jiva Gosvami in the Vaishnava Toshani, was originally that of a Karnataka Brahmin or a Saraswat Brahmin community, but I believe it's some 6 generations before Rupa and Sanatan, their ancestors had left Karnataka and come north, and I believe first some were in Andhra Pradesh, and then later further generations had come to Bengal. But I'd have to check, I don't recall off the top of my head if it was either Rupa and Sanatan's parents or grandparents who had adopted the role of being assistants to the ruling Islamic class, or assistants in the court of the Islamic king of the time in Bengal. So, according to the attitudes of that era, persons who had engaged in service to non-Hindus and those who are anti-Hindus were in some cases perceived as having, lost their status within Hindu society or the caste, hierarchy. So, although they're of Brahmin ancestry and although they grew up with Brahminical customs and, worshipped Radha and Krishna and were highly educated and so on, from a particular angle of analysis, they were also considered to be low-born in that although they were born in such a family, their family was one that had gone outside the mainstream, if you will, or outside the orthodox stream of the Hindu society at that time. So and they themselves had, served in the court of the Nawab Hussain Shah, and, knowingly contributed to his affairs and his administration, which did many things which would be objectionable from the viewpoint of observance of Hindu Dharma. So in that respect, they may have considered themselves low-born in that they weren't born in a family that had traditionally been exclusively adherent to Hindu custom and Hindu culture in full.
Thank you.
All right, well, let's conclude here for today. And in our next discussion, we'll look further at how Uddhava advises Gopakumar and what sadhana he ultimately performs, which gives rise to his attainment of Krishna Prem, Braja Prem, and darshan of Sri Krishna. All right, Vaishnavibhyo Namo Nama. Jai Shri Guru, Jai Shri Gaur, Jai Jai Shri Shri Radhe.
Jai Shri Gaur, Jai Shri Radhe. Hari Bol.
Jai